Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to bring this episode over to you because this week we hosted an inspiring coaching session with VEST members to plan for a successful 2025. So, at the beginning of the year, planning goals, intentions, um, and planning out and mapping out achievements that VEST members want to accomplish in the new year. During the session, we explore why plans, goals, and resolutions often fail. We also learn about how to map an individual plan using the WOOP framework, wish, outcome, obstacle plan. We also participated in peer and accountability breakouts and share valuable resources to help us stay on track throughout the year. Now, that was a private session that we couldn't bring to you. So instead, we're having this episode where we're highlighting some of the most impactful takeaways that we all learned or took away from that lesson or that session. And we're encouraging everyone that's tuning in for this particular episode to head out to our show notes at www.vesther.co/podcast. There you'll find all of the resources that we used during the session, including a step-by-step guide to mapping your own goals using the WOOP framework. We also share tips for identifying your focus areas using the VEST Wheel Life Assessment. We have a how to build a vision board and a lot of other resources. So definitely head over to www.vester.co/podcast to access all of those. But for now, let's go ahead and dive in, ladies. What what were your biggest takeaways from the session?
I'm happy to share. I was moderating the chat, and something that one of our members mentioned was how she finds it easier to prioritize the work habits in her life, and so she accomplishes a lot in her professional life, and she reaches a ton of goals. But how it can be hard to prioritize the habits that you personally want to achieve. And when she said that in the chat, a lot of people chimed in and said that they struggle with the same thing. And I think a lot of us do. And so I found that interesting. And I think that it's important for us to try to prioritize ourselves, as hard as that can be. We have to be able to fill up our own cup before we take care of really anything else in our lives. And as women in the professional field, we wear many hats at work and at home. And so to be able to wear those hats properly, we have to be able to prioritize our personal needs. And I think figuring out ways to do that is important. So um, whether it's with the WOOP, whether it's SMART goals, I think it's important to just prioritize ourselves so that we can wear those hats and wear them well.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you, Jay.
Great point, Jay. I think one of the biggest takeaways I had from the session was just when we went over just why plans tend to fail, right? So really reflecting on what has worked and what hasn't worked in the past, because I think it's so easy to just jump right into a goal. It's the new year, new me, like setting resolutions. It's time to go. What are you doing? How are you changing? And I think it's really important to take that time to reflect on what you've done, what's worked, what hasn't, to really set yourself up for the goals, the meaningful goals that you want to achieve in the year, in the month, in life.
Sarah, how about you?
I think just adding on to Gabby's point in terms of learning from what you've done previously, I think so often when we don't accomplish something in a day, we just give up. And I feel like that shouldn't be the case. It's like okay, this day I didn't get to do it, but we'll start again tomorrow and just continuing and giving yourself more grace because it's 365 days to a year, a long time. So,
Yep.
you know, you still have 365 days to get yourself back up and continue doing what you need to do. So I think, yeah, more grace.
Yeah. And it's easy, right? When it's easy to fall into cynicism that's how I find myself, like feeling cynic about resolutions or like, oh my gosh, it's just another year or whatever. But in the reality, most of us that are feeling that way, it's because we feel depleted and maybe burned out. And then you actually do take the time to do all of this planning and mapping out resources and figuring out systems that are going to help you keep you accountable. I think helps a lot with that, and helps a lot with, like you said, giving yourself grace when things don't pan out the way you plan them. And it doesn't mean that you have to quit. It just means that you hit a bump, and you would never tell your friends or other best members, oh my gosh, you suck, you failed today. You would just give them grace and say, try again tomorrow. So we need to treat, we need to have that same kindness with ourselves as well. Well, what about you individually? What are some of the challenges that you personally face when you're planning out for the year, and how do you overcome them? Anyone?
I think for me, it's that overwhelm of wanting to fix so many different areas in my life and not really prioritizing the right one. So getting overwhelmed with too many options and then not being able to define a solid plan for any of them. So then it just kind of feels like nothing is working, but it's really because I didn't take the time to prioritize what I wanted to do. I just kind of was like a squirrel where it's like over here, over here, over here. So that's something that I've really been focusing on this year too, is just taking the time again to reflect, taking the time to prioritize, and then moving on to the next important step, which is planning out, right? So what are my first steps? And not looking, for me specifically, not looking too far ahead, because then it gets, again, a little bit more overwhelmed, and just planning out my first steps.
Love that. Sarah,
I,
Jane, anything to add?
I can
And you,
oh, sorry, Sarah.
no, you
I,
go ahead.
I can relate with what Gabby said of feeling overwhelmed, and um, there's a lot of pressure. I think, kind of what you were saying, Erica, about the new year and like how are you going to be new and how are you going to be different, and I think it can create like anxiety almost sometimes, even though, but you have to look at it in a certain light for it to not be filled with anxiety. And I think to help combat that feeling is just talking to people that you really trust, and that know your best interest at heart, and explaining kind of the things that you want to change and are willing to change, and getting out of your head, because it can feel overwhelming and you can list off, 10 things you want to change, but uh, it can feel lonely at times. So I think being around people that you trust and love, and who love you back, that can help you walk through those processes, are a really good idea too, because we definitely don't have to be alone when doing all this either. So
Yeah.
that's what I'd say.
I also love that some of the members share, for this year, my goal is to rest. It's to not always be on this constant achievement and go getting mode. And that's okay too. That can be a goal, right? Like first assessing maybe what you need to let go this year. And I love that a lot of members share that. And it has to do with, if you're feeling overwhelmed and tired and you just need to refresh and maybe focus on other areas of your life that don't necessarily have to do with work, it's totally fine. So I love that. Thanks for sharing. Sarah, anything from you?
Just to add to what you were just saying, I feel like we are so conditioned to thinking that resting is like not productive. Like you're not, like this guilt that you feel for just taking some time off, and resting is so productive, right? It is something that is, you're working on it. You're working on re-energizing, recharging. So just sort of changing your mindset to
Yeah.
thinking that way when you are taking a rest. So I think that's something that I'm definitely going to work on this year.
I took my first nap of 2025. I talked about that during the session, and I actually did it yesterday. For some reason, my energy was just gone after like I think 1 p.m. yesterday. And you're right, Sarah. I feel guilty because there's so much to do, but I literally just had no energy and just had to go and take a nap. And I felt guilty, but then I also felt great. And today I was ready to go and pick back up. So love that. A lot of our members share unique approaches, some of their unique approach to keeping themselves accountable throughout the year. What strategies maybe stood out to you that some members share, or what strategies do you use to keep yourself accountable throughout the year?
I think picking back on what Jay you said earlier about finding someone you trust, I was super energized after our session on Wednesday, and I think it is that having a trusted group where we're sharing and we're communicating to each other, and that is part of accountability, right? Is like you first have to be vulnerable enough to share your goal with someone else, and so I'm so glad that so many of the members did share their goals, but also their tips and tricks and just how they deal with things. I think that information sharing has been super valuable and just re-energizing, especially during this overwhelming year again, the new year, new me season. Um, not just in our session, but also in our chats with members throughout this month. Again, they've just shared so much, and it's just re-energized.
And it re-energizes a lot. Like I think Rachel, one of our members, she wasn't able to attend the session, but she shared on the chat how her morning routine. Just seeing that for me, it was like, oh my God, because it's real, right? Like we read so much online about like what you should do at the beginning and I don't know about you guys, but for me, it just doesn't feel like it just feels too, I don't know, not practical. And I just love hearing all the practical ways in which, all the VEST members were managing and navigating life and work. So, well, Gabby, I want to turn it over to you. You facilitated most of the session and kind of guided us through the two exercises. And in your research, and I know you did a lot of research to kind of, go over what gets in the way of people achieving their goals. What are some of the ways in which you can hack your habits and keep yourself accountable? What was one key insight about why people often fail that you found very interesting?
I think for me, it was that that accountability part of it, right? One of the things that we shared with members and with our on our social media was that 42% that just by writing down your goal, you increase your chances of achieving it by 42%, right? I know we also had a session with another VEST coach where she talked about accountability, right, and creating those systems, and how the more you went through the accountability steps, the more likely you were to achieve your goals, right? So it's just that aspect of, again, being vulnerable enough to really sit down and think about your goals and what is important. Being vulnerable enough to share that, whether it's on paper, on pen, in person with someone else, right? Talking about it just once, right? Explaining that. And then the accountability part of like, okay, we're going to do check-ins. We're going to talk about this and we're going to see where we are, not in a shaming way, right? But just in a, what can we do better? What worked, what didn't work? Again, that reflection aspect of it. So I think that's something that can get missed, right? You think about your goals and you think about, what am I doing? How am I supposed to do it? What is my plan? But then that actual sharing aspect of it gets lost. So you bring someone along with you on your journey and you learn from them as they share tips and tricks. And you keep each other accountable by continuing to do it together, right? So I think that was super eye-opening for me.
Yeah, love that. Jay, you mentioned during the session that you and your husband, well, he's reading the book, but also bringing you along and kind of together, you guys are implementing some of the strategies in the Atomic Habits book that a lot of members actually commented that they've either already read, some have implemented it, but overall, everybody loves that book. But you specifically talked about habit stacking. Can you break down how you're using that habit stacking? How does that look like for you, or what are you and Noah thinking about in terms of implementing that in this new year?
Yeah, so habit stacking has been really helpful for me because it kind of takes away that overwhelming aspect of um, reaching a goal by breaking it down into small habits that feel easier to implement in your day-to-day life. Like Gabby and I were talking about, you sit down and you're like, okay, here's the things I want to change, here's the goal I want to hit, but whoa, like there's a lot of steps to get there and this feels overwhelming. So looking at how your day-to-day life already is, what habits do you already have implemented, and talking about morning routines, that's where I'm trying to implement my good habits. So what do we do every morning? I brush my teeth every morning and I wash my face every morning. So writing those, having a set habit that you can build off of, is essentially what habit stacking is. So after I brush my teeth and wash my face, then I'm going to read my book for 10 to 20 minutes. So reading in the morning, that's a habit that I would like to stack on to my already habits, that I'm already doing, habits I'm already doing. After I do the reading, then I'm going to have a nice protein filled breakfast to help my energy levels. And then after I have my protein breakfast, then I'll have my vitamins, which will also help my energy levels. And that's something that I am trying to work on. And that's kind of my goal, is to have more energy. And I think, like we're talking about, Erica, morning routines can, like, when you read about them, they can feel so practical or impractical. And you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stick to that because it sounds a little like I just kind of want to start my day. But really, when you slow down and you take your time, it can make your day uh, flow better, and you have this sense of natural energy just from taking care of yourself in the morning. And that's essentially what habit stacking is taking your habits that you've already done and adding a couple every day that is reaching towards your goal. So for me, it's reading my book for 20 minutes and then eating a really great breakfast and taking my vitamins. And those three stackable habits alone are helping me feel more energized throughout the day, which is what I've been wanting. So yeah, it's been really cool to not specifically read that book, but to learn from Noah and get some great advice. And it's been really helpful.
Yeah. And I love that even before you talked about stacking habits, actually, Sarah, you talked about how one of your goals is doing 8 to 10,000 steps, but also spending more time intentionally with your kids. And so now you go on walks, but take your kids. I mean, that's a form of stacking, right? Like you're spending more time with the kiddos, but then you're also taking them out for a walk to achieve your step count. And I haven't read the book recently, but if I remember, I think part of the benefits of stacking goals is also to make it uber obvious, right? Because the more obvious that it is, the more disciplined you're likely to be, right? Like it's part of building a system of accountability. It's like just make it obvious so that you don't miss it and you don't even question. It's no longer a decision because you've already decided I'm going to brush my teeth and then I'm going to read my book and then I'm going to take my vitamins. It's not, you don't have to add energy to your brain to make a decision or what should I read no, that's just what you're going to do. And you're just going to stack things and make it easier. Same with you, Sarah, and your steps and spending time with your babies. So I love that. Another question that I have, Sarah and Gabby, particularly for you, because we talk about this all the time. I mean, as a society, women still bear most of the caregiving responsibility, household management chores, etc. And I know that it's particularly harder when you have small, little ones at home, which both of you have. So just curious as to maybe some tips that you can share with us in how you're both balancing work and raising children Do you have a specific approach in setting realistic goals for the year while you're still managing home and professional responsibilities?
Yeah, I think for me, it's when you're in this season of life, so much of what you can achieve really depends on your support system. So my approach, at least this year, when I set my goal, was to work on it with my husband and vice versa. So we would set individual goals and then what our goal is as a family, but so we can both understand how what is needed to support one another um, to be able to succeed, making it realistic. And then another thing is just to break down my goals into smaller, actionable steps that you can incorporate into, your daily routine, so that it doesn't get lost, and then they essentially become habits. So it's not, to your point, Erica, it's not even a decision. Like that's just something that you do. You go on walks. That's what we do. So
Oh,
we'll see how it goes. I found it quite useful so far. So far, so good.
good.
I love what you said in terms of like that season of life because I have an 8 and an almost 4-year-old, and I feel like every year is a little different. And I was at the beginning of this year when we were talking about my husband and I were talking about our goals. We were just kind of reflecting on last year, and at this stage, my 8-year-old is very much into sports. And last year we were like inundated with sports and after school activities, and even for my 3-year-old as well. So daycare events and school events. And it gets so easy. You think toddler stage, baby stage, like it's all about the children, but you can also carry that into like their later stages as well. And I love attending those games and I love attending those school sessions and, after school activities. Um, but just looking back on it, like we really didn't prioritize ourselves. We didn't prioritize our needs and goals. And so there was definitely a lot of burnout on our end. So really taking the time to figure out like what do we want to do, not what do we have to do, but what do we want to do and how do we want to take care of ourselves, and what do we want to achieve and where do we want to go this year. So really like asking ourselves this question up front versus kind of reflecting at the end of the year when it's already happened and you realize that the whole year has passed and you haven't really done what you wanted to do. So that I think that was a really great talk that we had at the beginning of this year. And then as far as tool, I honestly like live by a calendar, just like being able to write everything down and seeing what the month looks like, how it gets filled out. Is it too crazy? Is it too, I guess even this year, is it too kid activity filled? And is there time is there time to prioritize myself, my relationship, my hobbies, things that I want to get into this year. So
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I think obviously all of us work together. So all of us have seen Gabby's organizing skills and her calendar, mega mapping plans. So definitely, Gabby, we've experienced it firsthand how you work and how you think. And another thing that I love here is that everybody kind of seems like to make the time to discuss and plan their goals with their significant other. That's great. Because I do think it's important having that, I love, Sarah, how you started answering the question of balancing by saying it depends on the support system that you have. And I think that all of us four here are very privileged that we are in a healthy relationship where we do have that support system. And we also want to recognize that not everybody has that, right? And not everybody has that in a romantic relationship and or a family support system, or even a friend support system and a community support system. So in terms of accountability, I do think that I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a support system. Those of us that have executive boards, or boards that we have to report to, and we have to report to on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis or an annual basis, we know that it works. We may not like it, getting ready for those stakeholder meetings and doing all of that. But at the end of the day, it does work because we measure, right? Is it working? Is it not working? What do we need? What do we not need? So it just helps in such a way. So I always encourage everyone that, you need your own advisory board if you don't have one. And even if you do have one for work, you need a personal one, right? Somebody that can kind of help you assess how you're doing life in your own terms. So just, I don't know, I think that we are very privileged, and that I also discuss my goals with Chris and how we did the previous years with our financials, with our personal goals, with our business goals. But also recognizing that not everybody has that. And so if you don't have that, it's even more important that you find yourself a support system to be there for you. And it can be friends, it can be family, it can be, if you don't have that right now, maybe joining a peer group. It doesn't have to be best, but of course we would love to have you at best. So if you're thinking about having a support system, please do check out our peer group, and we would welcome you with open arms. Before we close and we turn it over to having like a segment for listeners to do their own planning and exercise, I want to ask all of you, anything else that you want to share from this week's session and for this episode that might be super helpful for those listening?
I think something that we've touched on a few times, and that's really important, is I just want to talk about rest again, because I think it's so important, and I think we have such a hard time with feeling okay about it. But I think just to kind of simplify it down in a way that we can try to not feel so guilty is, if you are feeling physically, mentally, emotionally like you need to rest, then I think just trust your body. And I think it's just as simple as that. And I think we can, if we just really focus on that, then maybe we can take away some of the guilt, because I think we should always trust not only our instincts and our gut, but also our body. And our body is our emotional and mental state as well. And so even if you aren't physically tired and you're like, well, I didn't even move enough today. Well, you might have done a lot of other mental work that you're not even aware of yet. So I think when it comes to rest and taking naps and taking that time for yourself to try to take away some of the guilt, if your body or your mind is telling you that you're just tired, and I think that's all the permission that you need. So I would just encourage all of us to really just trust ourselves and our bodies. That's another book. What's it called? The Body Keeps the Score. I've heard really good things about that. It's another book I want to read. But I think it's basically about that, like trusting your body and what it tells you. So
I love that. Let's put it on the show notes if members want to check it out as well, or listeners. Sarah, Gabby, what about you guys?
I think for me, a standout thing, a takeaway from the session was definitely to take the time to not only reflect on what's important, but then also to reflect on those small wins. I think it's so easy to focus on the big overarching goal, and it can seem so far away, but as you look back, you tend to forget how far you've come from when you started. So not only taking the time to reflect, but also taking the time to really celebrate those small wins, to celebrate progress over perfection. I think I'm undiagnosed perfectionist, self-diagnosed perfectionist. And so really taking the time to think, it may not be perfect, but it's done, or, look how far I've come. I think is super important.
Absolutely love that.
I was going to say something very similar to Gabby. I think I focus on just achieving being perfect, but you tend to give up on the goals once you make a small mistake. But to my point earlier, it's 365 days in a year. You're work in progress, celebrate the small win, So small steps.
Yeah, and that saying, perfection and growth can't coexist, right? So it's about giving ourselves the grace to be imperfect, and also realizing the beauty of being imperfect is that there's always room for growth and learning opportunities. Well, with that, we want to turn it over to the listeners that are taking the time to listen to this episode or watching this on YouTube, however you're consuming this content. One of the most powerful exercises that we actually had VAS members complete during the session was to envision their future self, right? Imagining, often, especially as women, it's very easy for us to think about what if things don't work out? What if things go south? But what if things go right? Right? Like we often tend to go through that trail of negativity and fail to think, well, what if everything works? What if we achieve everything that we set out to in the next year? What would that future self look like? And so we asked them to reflect on that, right? Like, imagine yourself a year from now having achieved everything you set out to. What does it feel like? What are you doing? Who are you spending time with? And then we asked them to reflect what needs to change today in order for you to become that version of yourself. And so it was a very powerful exercise. We received a lot of good feedback from the members that participated. And we want to now invite those of you listening to do the same. Take a moment to imagine yourself a year from now and everything that you set out to accomplish. Imagine that you've realized. What does your future self look like? Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? How does it feel like? How are you spending your day? With whom? And once you picture yourself doing that, take a step back and reflect on the changes that need to happen again. So, what habits need to change? Are there any unproductive patterns holding you back? Relationships holding you back? What relationships need to shift? Who in your circle is actually supporting your growth, and who might be getting in the way of you becoming that future self? And then be real about what systems you need to implement, right? How are you going to keep yourself accountable? How are you going to make those systems obvious, actionable, and sustainable over time so that you can stay consistent? So that is the challenge that we're going to set out to the people that are listening today. Anything else you guys want to add? All right, well, take the minute to do that. And if you are we had a lot of members that are struggling with like even identifying where to focus their energy, right? Because they can't feel overwhelmed, as you guys mentioned. So we also put together the VES Wheel of Life assessment and the toolkit that I mentioned. So again, you can go to www.vestor.co/podcast and click on this episode. And in the show notes, you'll see all of the tools that we provided, including this VES Wheel of Life assessment. This tool will help you evaluate the areas in your life, whether it's personal, professional, or beyond, and pinpoint where you might need more attention and improvement. This is if you don't know where to start, if you don't know where to focus, if you are just feeling overwhelmed. I really suggest that you take the time to do this exercise. This is another thing that Sarah, you mentioned you actually did with your husband, and it was pretty similar. So that's fun too. You can maybe do it with a loved one or with friends, get together with friends and do that. Yeah, so again, www.vestor.co/podcast, and you can access, click on the episode and you'll be able to access all of the show notes. And finally, just remember that navigating life, building habits, and staying accountable is hard work. It's not something that we're meant to do alone. This whole myth of meritocracy that you're supposed to do all of this, keep your head down, work hard, and things will come to you. It just ends up, even if you do achieve, like many of us have, and whether it's corporate America or whatever your profession is, we end up feeling very lonely. So this is where community is really important, and having a support system is very important. Again, whether it's VEST or another peer community, it can make all of the difference. So be sure that you look for that if you don't already have a group of like-minded individuals that can provide you encouragement, accountability, and support. Be sure to look for one this year. Maybe make it one of your goals. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy the episode, share with a friend, and don't forget to leave us a review as it enables us to reach even more women. Thank you again. And if you're looking for a support system to help you stay accountable, consider investing in yourself and joining our peer network. You can learn more at www.vester.co and apply today.